The chandelier was falling, and Angela had exactly one choice: cover the mafia boss's daughter with her own body, or let the 6-year-old burn alive. She chose the fire. And when Robert Silva burst through the flames and saw his maid shielding his child, he roared 3 words that changed everything. Don't touch her! But he wasn't protecting his daughter, he was protecting Angela. And that's when she became the most dangerous person in Chicago's underworld. The evening light filtered through the tall windows of the Silva mansion, casting golden shadows across the polished marble floors. Angela Jackson moved between the abandoned dinner tables with practiced efficiency, her footsteps slant against the pristine surface. The air still held traces of expensive cologne and cigar smoke from Robert Silva's private gathering, powerful men who spoke in coded language and left without saying goodbye. Almost done, Angela? Maria, the head housekeeper, called from the doorway, her weathered face softening with concern. You've been on your feet since sunrise. Angela smiled, genuine despite the exhaustion settling into her bones. Just finishing the ballroom, Ms. Maria. Then I'm done. She'd been working at the mansion for 8 months now, ever since she'd left Georgia with 2 suitcases and a determination to build something better than the poverty she'd grown up in. The position had come through a staffing agency. Good pay, room and board, references required. Chicago felt like another world compared to the small town she'd fled, and the Silva mansion existed in a different universe entirely. The estate sprawled across 3 acres in Lincoln Park, a fortress disguised as elegance. Angela had learned quickly that questions weren't welcome here. She kept her head down, did exceptional work, and saved every dollar she could. In another year, she'd have enough to enroll in nursing school. She wanted to help people, to be someone who made a difference in lives that felt as fragile as her own once had. The evening shift was quieter than the chaos of morning preparations. Angela moved through the ballroom, collecting crystal glasses and straightening velvet-backed chairs. The chandeliers above her sparkled like captured stars, each one worth more than she'd earned in 5 years. She'd learned not to think about that too much. Upstairs, she could hear laughter. Mr. Silva's daughter was still awake, probably convincing her nanny to read one more story. Angela had seen Sophie a handful of times, a blonde 6-year-old with her father's serious eyes and a sadness that seemed too heavy for such small shoulders. The little girl had waved at her once in the hallway, and Angela had waved back before remembering she wasn't supposed to interact with the family. Rosita, the cook who'd become Angela's only real friend in the mansion, worked the kitchen with her usual efficient grace. Don't stay too late, she'd warned earlier. Mr. Silva has another meeting tonight, the kind where staff should stay invisible. Angela understood. She'd witnessed enough tense conversations, seen enough men in expensive suits speaking in hushed tones, to know that Robert Silva's business wasn't something she wanted to understand. He was polite to her, distant, but never cruel, and that was more than enough. That's when the lights flickered. Angela paused, a wine glass in her hand, and looked up at the chandelier. The crystals swayed slightly, catching the light. Then she smelled it. Sharp, chemical, wrong, smoke. Before she could move, an explosion ripped through the west wing of the mansion. The sound was deafening, a crack of thunder that seemed to split the world open. The floor trembled beneath her feet. Somewhere, glass shattered in a cascade of breaking crystal. Then the scream started. Before we get started, don't forget to give this video a like, hit that subscribe button, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. Your support helps us bring you even more incredible stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's get into the story. Angela's training, the safety videos the agency had made her watch, her own survival instincts honed by years of navigating dangerous situations, kicked in immediately. She dropped the glass and turned toward the source of the chaos. Flames were already crawling up the velvet curtains near the grand staircase, spreading faster than seemed possible. The west wing was engulfed, orange and red consuming everything it touched. People emerged from the smoke. Mr. Silva's guests, men in tailored suits now ash-streaked and frantic. Armed security rushed past her, shouting into radios. The ballroom had become a war zone in seconds. And then she saw her. Sophie Silva stood frozen at the top of the marble staircase, still in her white nightgown. Her nanny was nowhere in sight. The little girl's eyes were wide with terror, watching the flames spread toward her, with the blank shock of a child who couldn't process what was happening. She wasn't crying. She wasn't moving. She was simply standing there, waiting for the fire to reach her. Angela didn't think. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She launched herself toward the staircase, her muscles burning with sudden exertion. The smoke was thicker now, stinging her eyes and throat. She reached Sophie in 5 desperate strides, scooped the child into her arms, and felt the immediate change in the air. Something was about to collapse. "I've got you, baby," Angela whispered urgently, pulling Sophie against her chest. "Close your eyes and don't look up. I've got you." The chandelier, the massive, priceless chandelier she'd just been standing beneath, tore free from the ceiling with a groan of twisting metal. Angela threw herself sideways, landing hard on the marble floor with Sophie wrapped completely in her arms. She covered the girl's body with her own, making herself a shield as 2,000 pounds of crystal and iron crashed down exactly where they'd been standing. The impact sent debris flying. Angela felt something sharp cut across her shoulder, felt heat searing against her back, but she didn't move. She curled tighter around Sophie, her hands cradling the girl's head, her body absorbing every piece of falling wreckage that tried to reach the child beneath her. Sophie was crying now, silent sobs that shook her small frame. Angela adjusted her grip, ensuring every inch of the girl was protected. "You're safe, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice surprisingly steady despite the terror flooding her veins. "What's your name, honey?" "Sophie," the girl choked out. "Sophie, that's a beautiful name. My name is Angela. I need you to be really brave for me, Sophie. Can you do that? Keep your eyes closed and stay perfectly still." Time fragmented. It could have been 30 seconds or 30 minutes. Angela's heart hammered so violently she thought her ribs might crack. The heat was unbearable, the smoke suffocating, but she didn't move. Every protective instinct she possessed focused on keeping this child, this little girl she barely knew, alive. Then, cutting through the chaos like a blade through water, a voice rang out, "Don't touch her!" The command was absolute, delivered with such raw authority that the entire mansion seemed to freeze. Angela felt the shift immediately, the way the armed men stopped mid-stride, the way even the fire seemed to pause. She turned her head slightly, still covering Sophie, and saw him through the smoke. Robert Silva stood in the doorway of the ballroom, his tailored suit torn and ash-covered, his face a mask of fury and something else Angela couldn't name. His dark eyes locked onto her, onto the black maid covering his daughter with her own body in the middle of his burning empire. He wasn't talking to Angela. He was warning everyone else not to come near her. Hours later, as paramedics wrapped bandages around her burned hands and detectives asked questions she barely heard, Angela would try to remember what her life had been like before this moment. Before she became the woman who'd thrown herself into fire for a child who wasn't hers. Before Robert Silva looked at her like she was something more than invisible. The Silva mansion looked like a war zone under the harsh lights of emergency vehicles. Red and blue strobes painted the smoke-stained marble in alternating colors, casting everything in an unsettling, pulsing glow. Fire trucks surrounded the estate like sentries, their crews still hosing down the smoldering West Wing. The air tasted of ash and chemicals. Angela sat on the edge of an ambulance, Sophie still clutched in her lap. The girl hadn't let go of her uniform since Angela had carried her out of the burning ballroom. Every time a paramedic tried to separate them, Sophie's grip tightened, and fresh tears spilled down her soot-covered cheeks. "Ma'am, we need to check your injury," the paramedic insisted, his young face creased with concern. "Those burns on your hands." "Not yet," Angela said quietly, her arms tightening protectively around Sophie. "She needs to be checked first. Please." Robert Silva stood 10 feet away, speaking in low, clipped tones with his head of security. But his eyes kept returning to Angela, to the woman holding his daughter like she was the most precious thing in the world. His suit jacket was gone, his white shirt torn and gray with ash. A cut above his eyebrow had stopped bleeding, but no one had bothered to clean it. Behind the police barricades, reporters jostled for position, camera flashes bursting like small explosions. News vans lined the street, satellite dishes pointing toward the sky. By morning, this would be everywhere. The Silva Mansion attack, Chicago's most powerful crime family targeted in their own home. Inside the remaining structure, Robert's men moved like shadows, some watching the perimeter, others watching Angela, with expressions that made her skin prickle. In their world, she understood instinctively, heroism was suspicious. Nobody did something for nothing. Everyone had an angle. She felt their eyes calculating, measuring, trying to figure out what hers was. Miss Jackson, a detective approached, his badge glinting in the emergency lights. Detective Russo, maybe 50, with tired eyes that had seen too much. I need to ask you some questions about tonight. Angela looked up at him, then back down at Sophie, whose breathing had finally begun to steady. Can it wait? It's fine. Robert's voice cut through, closer now. He'd moved without her noticing, now standing directly beside the ambulance. This close, she could see the tension in his jaw, the controlled fury radiating from him like heat. Ask your questions, detective, but make it quick. Russo's expression tightened, but he nodded. Miss Jackson, where were you when the explosion occurred? The ballroom, cleaning up from dinner. Did you see anyone unusual? Anyone who didn't belong? Angela shook her head. Just the regular staff. Mr. Silva's guests had already left. And you ran toward the fire? Russo's tone suggested this was the part he couldn't reconcile. I ran toward Sophie, Angela corrected, her voice firm. She was alone on the staircase. The detective studied her for a long moment, then glanced at Robert. We've confirmed it was arson. Incendiary devices planted in the West Wing. Time to detonate during your meeting. Someone wanted you dead, Mr. Silva. You and everyone in that room. Robert's expression didn't change, but Angela felt the shift in him, the way his entire body went still in that dangerous way predators do before they strike. And the staff? We're running background checks on everyone. So far, Russo flipped through his notebook. Miss Jackson's record is clean. Employment history, references, everything checks out. She's exactly who she appears to be. The way he said it made being ordinary sound suspicious. That'll be all for now, detective, Robert said, dismissing him with barely concealed impatience. After Russo left, Robert turned his full attention to Angela for the first time since the chaos had ended. Up close, his eyes were darker than she'd realized, almost black in the flickering emergency lights. They held an intelligence that made her feel exposed, seen in a way she'd spent 8 months trying to avoid. Sophie, he said gently, his voice transforming when he addressed his daughter. The paramedics need to check you now, and Miss Jackson needs help too. No, Sophie whimpered, burrowing deeper into Angela's chest. Sophie. It's okay, Angela interrupted softly. She looked down at the girl in her arms, brushing soot-darkened blonde hair from her face. Sophie, sweetheart, your daddy's right here. He won't let anything happen to you. You're safe now. But I need you to be brave one more time, okay? Let the nice doctors make sure you're not hurt. Sophie's large eyes, so much like her father's, searched Angela's face. Will you stay? I'm not going anywhere, Angela promised. Only then did Sophie allow herself to be transferred to a stretcher. The paramedics worked quickly, checking her vitals, examining her for injuries. Miraculously, aside from smoke inhalation and minor scrapes, she was unharmed. The same couldn't be said for Angela. When they finally peeled back her uniform sleeves, the burns on her hands and forearms made the lead paramedic wince. You need a hospital. These are second degree, ma'am. You should be in serious pain right now. Angela looked down at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. The adrenaline was wearing off, and with it came the sharp, searing agony she'd been holding at bay. She swayed slightly. Robert's hand shot out, steadying her with a grip that was surprisingly gentle. Treat her here. We have everything you need. Sir, with respect, she needs... Here, Robert repeated, and this time it wasn't a suggestion. Hours later, after the emergency crews had left and the reporters had finally dispersed, Angela sat alone in her small room in the servant quarters. Her hands were wrapped in white gauze, the burns treated and dressed. Someone had left clean clothes folded on her bed. She'd managed to shower, though the water running gray with ash down the drain had made her stomach turn. She should have been exhausted. Instead, she felt wired, every nerve still firing with leftover adrenaline. The image of Sophie frozen on that staircase played on loop behind her eyelids. The weight of the little girl in her arms, the sound of Robert Silva's voice cutting through the chaos. Don't touch her. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. She opened the door to find Robert Silva standing in the narrow hallway of the servant quarters, a place she was certain he'd never visited before. He looked out of place here, too large for the modest space, too powerful for the plain walls and simple doors. Mr. Silva, Angela said, surprise making her voice higher than usual. Is Sophie? She's sleeping, finally. He paused, and for the first time, she saw something other than authority in his expression. Uncertainty, maybe. Exhaustion. May I come in? It wasn't really a question, but the fact that he'd asked at all startled her into stepping aside. He entered, his presence immediately filling the small room. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. He looked at her bandaged hands, at the bruise forming on her cheekbone, at the person who'd thrown herself into fire for his daughter. You saved her life, he said finally, his voice lower than she'd ever heard it. That's something money can't repay. Angela met his gaze, steady despite the way her heart had started racing again. I didn't do it for money, sir. She's just a little girl. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. In his world, she realized, people didn't say things like that. People didn't act without expecting something in return. Nevertheless, he continued, but the word felt hollow, like he was trying to apply his usual rules to a situation that didn't fit them. You'll be compensated, protected. Whatever you need. I don't need anything, Angela interrupted gently. I just need to know she's safe. Robert Silva stared at her, and Angela had the strange sensation that he was seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. Not as staff, not as an employee, as a person who'd done something his world had taught him didn't exist. An act of pure, selfless courage. When he finally left, closing the door quietly behind him, Angela sank onto her bed. Her hands throbbed. Her body ached. But what unsettled her most was the look in Robert Silva's eyes just before he'd turned away. It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't suspicion. It was something far more dangerous. Recognition. The Silva mansion felt different in the days after the fire. The West Wing remained cordoned off, a blackened skeleton of what had been. Construction crews worked around the clock, but no amount of restoration could erase the smell of smoke that clung to everything like a ghost. Angela returned to work on the third day, despite Maria's protests that she should rest longer. Staying in her room meant too much time to think, too many hours replaying the moment the chandelier fell, the weight of Sophie in her arms, the absolute authority in Robert Silva's voice when he'd said those 3 words that had somehow changed everything. But the mansion she returned to wasn't the one she'd left. The whispers started in the kitchen. Angela felt them before she heard them. The way conversations stopped when she entered a room, how eyes followed her movements with calculating suspicion. Rosa, who'd shared coffee with her just days ago, now turned away when Angela approached. David, one of the groundskeepers, made the sign of the cross when she passed. People are talking, Maria finally said on the 4th morning, her weathered hands sorting linens with unnecessary force. Her voice was low, careful. Saying things. Angela's stomach tightened. What things? That it's strange, isn't it? A new maid, barely here 8 months, just happens to be in the right place at the right time. Maria wouldn't meet her eyes. That maybe someone wanted to get close to the family, that fires don't start themselves. The words hit like a physical blow. They think Angela couldn't even finish the sentence. Maria, you know me. You know I would never. I know, Maria interrupted, but her tone lacked conviction. But in this house, Angela, knowing doesn't matter. Surviving does. And right now, people are scared. Scared people look for someone to blame. The guards appeared that afternoon, and 2 of them, stone-faced men in dark suits, who positioned themselves outside whatever room Angela occupied. When she moved, they moved. When she worked, they watched. Robert had assigned them for her protection, Maria explained. But the message was clear to everyone else. Angela Jackson was either a suspect or a target, possibly both. The other staff gave her an even wider berth after that. Cursed, she heard someone mutter as she passed through the service hallway. Bad luck follows her. First the fire, now this. Nothing good comes from getting involved with the family. Angela kept her head down and did her work. But the isolation pressed against her like a physical weight. She'd survived poverty, escaped an abusive home, rebuilt herself from nothing. But this felt different. This was a cage made of suspicion and silence, and she didn't know how to break free. Detective Lyle arrived on the fifth day. He was younger than Detective Russo, maybe 40, with sharp features and eyes that moved too quickly, cataloging everything. He found Angela in the library, dusting shelves under the watchful gaze of her assigned guards. "Miss Jackson," he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "I'm Detective Lyle with the Chicago PD. I have a few follow-up questions about the night of the incident." Angela set down her cloth, her wrapped hands moving carefully. The burns were healing, but they still ached. "Detective Russo already questioned me. I know, I'm just covering some additional angles." He pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open with practiced ease. "You've worked here 8 months, correct?" "Yes. And before that, I worked for a cleaning company in Georgia. Before that, various service positions. I can provide references." "No need, no need." His tone was light, almost friendly, but something about it made Angela's skin crawl. "I'm just trying to understand the full picture. You moved to Chicago alone?" "Yes. No family here? No connections to Mr. Silva's business associates?" The way he said business associates made it clear he knew exactly what Robert Silva was, and that he was fishing for something specific. "None," Angela said firmly. "I came here for work, that's all." Lyle studied her, his pen tapping against his notebook. "It's remarkable, really. You risked your life for a child you barely knew. That's either incredibly brave or incredibly calculated." Angela felt her guards shift behind her. They were listening to every word. "It wasn't calculated, detective. It was human decency." "Human decency." He repeated the words like they were foreign. "In my experience, Miss Jackson, people in this world don't act without motive. Everyone wants something. What is it you want?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. Angela met his gaze steadily. "I want to do my job and be left alone. Is that what Mr. Silva wants?" Lyle leaned forward slightly. "Because from where I'm standing, you've become very important to this family very quickly. That's dangerous for someone in your position. The wrong people might think you have influence, information, leverage." There it was, the real reason for his visit. He wasn't investigating the fire. He was trying to turn her, to see if she could be used as an asset against Robert Silva. "I'm a maid, detective. I clean rooms and serve dinner. I don't have information. I don't have influence. And I don't appreciate being interrogated in my workplace." Something flickered in Lyle's expression. Annoyance, maybe, or calculation. He closed his notebook slowly. "Of course, just doing my due diligence. Though I'd suggest being careful, Miss Jackson. The Silva family has a way of consuming people. Heroes today, liabilities tomorrow. You might want to consider who your real friends are." He left his card on the library table, a small white rectangle that felt like a threat and an invitation all at once. After he'd gone, Angela stood there, her heart racing. One of her guards spoke for the first time all day. "Mr. Silva will want to know about this conversation." Angela didn't doubt it. That evening, Robert found himself watching surveillance footage he had no real reason to review. Angela, moving through the hallways, her bandaged hands carrying linens. Angela in the kitchen, isolated from the other staff. Angela, sitting alone in the garden during her break, staring at nothing while 2 guards loomed nearby like sentinels. His head of security had briefed him on Detective Lyle's visit. "He's dirty," Marco had said flatly. "Works for the Carusos. He's looking for an angle." Robert had expected that. What he hadn't expected was the protective fury that had surged through him at the thought of someone trying to manipulate Angela. Use her, threaten her. "Double her security," he'd ordered. "And I want to know everyone she talks to." Now he switched to the live feed from the East Wing and saw what he'd been unconsciously searching for, Angela with Sophie. His daughter sat on Angela's lap in the small sitting room off the kitchen, a space usually reserved for staff breaks. Sophie was showing Angela a drawing, her small voice animated in a way it hadn't been since her mother had left 2 years ago. Angela listened with complete attention, her wrapped hands gentle as she pointed to something on the page. making Sophie giggle. The sound cut through Robert like a blade. He remembered the words he'd shouted through the flames. Don't touch her. At the time, he'd told himself it was about Sophie, protecting his daughter from the chaos, from his men who might accidentally harm her in their panic. But watching Angela now, seeing the way she held his daughter with such careful tenderness, he knew the truth he'd been avoiding. He'd been protecting Angela too, the woman who'd thrown herself into fire, who'd covered Sophie with her own body, who'd looked at him in that servant's quarters and said she didn't want money, didn't want anything, just wanted his daughter to be safe. In Robert's world, people like that didn't exist. Everyone wanted something, everyone had an angle. Trust was currency, loyalty was negotiated, and love was a weakness that got you killed. But Angela Jackson had shattered every rule he'd built his empire on. And watching her now, isolated, suspected, guarded like a prisoner she'd done nothing to become, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, guilt, and beneath it, more dangerous still, the beginning of something that felt terrifyingly like need. He closed the laptop abruptly, as if cutting the feed could sever the connection. But Sophie's laughter echoed in his mind, long after the screen went dark, tangled inextricably with the image of Angela's steady green eyes meeting his without fear. I didn't do it for money, sir. She's just a little girl. Robert poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey and stood at his office window, looking out at the scorched wing of his mansion. Someone had tried to kill him. Tried to kill Sophie. And the only person who'd stood between his daughter and death was a woman his world had trained him not to trust. The realization unsettled him more than any rival's threat ever had. Because Robert Silva had spent 20 years building an empire on the principle that everyone could be bought, controlled, or destroyed. Angela Jackson was proving to be none of those things. And that made her the most dangerous person in his world. Angela had always been observant. Growing up in a house where survival meant reading the room before entering it, she'd learned to notice details others missed. The shift in someone's tone, the way a door stood slightly ajar when it should be locked, the careful way people avoided certain subjects. The Silva mansion was full of things people didn't talk about. But lately, the silences felt different, heavier, deliberate. It started with small things. A door to Robert's private office left open when she knew it had been locked an hour earlier. Coded notes in the trash bin outside the study. Numbers and initials that meant nothing to her but had been torn deliberately into pieces, as if someone wanted them destroyed, but not completely. Strange phone calls at night that ended abruptly when she passed through the hallway. Angela told herself it wasn't her business. She was a maid, not an investigator. But the fire had changed something in her. She couldn't unknow what she'd seen. The coordinated attack, the precision of it, the way Robert's men had moved like they were expecting war. Someone had tried to murder a 6-year-old girl, and whoever it was, they were still out there. On the 8th night after the fire, Angela couldn't sleep. The burns on her hands had healed enough to ache rather than scream, and the silence of her small room felt suffocating. She pulled on a robe and slipped into the hallway, thinking she'd make tea in the kitchen. That's when she heard the voices. 2 men stood in the shadows of the service corridor. Marco, Robert's head of security, and another man she recognized as Tony Falco, one of the lieutenants who'd been at the dinner the night of the fire. Their voices were low, urgent, but the sound carried strangely in the old mansion. Angela froze, instinct telling her to stay silent. Can't wait much longer, Marco was saying. If there's a second fire, we need to be ready. The boss is exposed. The girl complicates things, Tony replied. And now this maid, she's clean. Background checks came back spotless. Russo confirmed it, even Lyle couldn't dig up dirt. That's what worries me. Nobody's that clean, not in this world. Angela's heart hammered. They were talking about her. The boss trusts her, Marco said. And something in his tone suggested this was a problem. Saw him watching the security feeds again last night. He's getting attached. Attachments get people killed. Tell him that. Their footsteps moved away, and Angela pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing. A second fire. Robert was exposed. She was a complication. The pieces didn't quite fit together, but the shape of something dark was emerging. The next morning, Angela did something she'd never done before. She went where she wasn't supposed to go. The West Wing remained off limits. Yellow caution tape stretched across the entrance. Construction crews worked during the day, but it was early enough that the space was empty. Angela slipped under the tape, her heart racing. The damage was worse than she'd imagined. Entire sections of wall had collapsed, exposing blackened beams and melted fixtures. The smell of smoke was overwhelming, mixed with chemicals from whatever accelerant had been used. She moved carefully through the debris, not entirely sure what she was looking for. Maybe evidence, maybe answers, maybe just proof that she wasn't losing her mind. She found it in what had been a storage room, a metal filing cabinet, twisted by heat but intact enough that its drawers still opened. Inside, a scorched photo frame, the glass cracked into a spiderweb pattern. Angela pulled it out, her wrapped hands trembling. The photograph inside stopped her heart. A young man in a Silva mansion staff uniform stood beside Robert, in what looked like the mansion's garage. The man was smiling, broad and genuine, his arms slung casually over Robert's shoulder in a way that suggested familiarity, friendship even. He wore a mechanic's coveralls, grease smudged on one cheek. Angela knew that smile. She'd grown up with it. Malcolm, her brother, her dead brother, who'd disappeared 3 years ago, who'd left Georgia for Chicago and stopped calling home. Who their mother had buried with an empty casket because his body was never found. The photo frame slipped from her hands, clattering against the debris-strewn floor. Malcolm had worked here, in this mansion, for Robert Silva. And Robert had never said a word. Angela didn't remember walking to Robert's office, didn't remember pushing past his assistant or throwing open the door. She only knew that suddenly she was standing there, the scorched photo frame clutched in her bandaged hands, and Robert was rising from his desk with an expression she'd never seen before. Shock. And beneath it, something that looked like dread. "You knew," Angela said, her voice shaking. "You knew who I was. You knew Malcolm was my brother." Robert's jaw tightened. "Angela, don't!" She held up the photo, the glass glinting in the office light. "He worked for you. He died for you. And you never said a word, not when I applied for this job, not when I saved your daughter, not when you stood in my room and told me I was safe here. It wasn't that simple." "Then make it simple." The words burst out of her, 3 years of grief and confusion and buried rage finally breaking through. "My mother buried an empty casket, Mr. Silva. We had a funeral with no body. The police told us Malcolm had been in an accident, that there was nothing to identify. Was that a lie? Did you lie to my family?" Robert moved around the desk, and she saw the carefully controlled way he held himself, like a man approaching something fragile that might shatter. "I didn't know you were his sister until 2 days ago. When the background checks came back, when I saw your family history—" "2 days?" Angela's voice cracked. "You've known for 2 days and said nothing? Because I didn't know how to tell you." The admission seemed to cost him something. His hands flexed at his sides, and for the first time since she'd known him, Robert Silva looked uncertain. "Malcolm he was good, loyal. He worked as a mechanic here, kept the fleet running. I trusted him. What happened to him?" The silence stretched between them like a wound. "There was a situation," Robert finally said, his voice careful, measured. 3 years ago, one of my rivals tried to plant explosives in my car. Malcolm found them during routine maintenance. He tried to disarm them, but he stopped, swallowed hard. The blast killed him instantly. He saved my life. Probably saved Sophie's too, since she was supposed to be in that car with me that day." Angela felt the room tilt. "He died protecting you." "Yes, and you covered it up, made it look like an accident." "I protected his family," Robert corrected, his voice hardening slightly. "If word got out that Malcolm had been killed because of his connection to me, your mother would have been targeted. You would have been targeted. I made it clean, quick. Gave your family money through a fake insurance payout. You don't get to decide what my family needed." Angela's voice rose, raw with emotion. "You don't get to lie to us and call it protection. I made the choice I thought would keep you safe." "Safe?" Angela laughed, the sound brittle and broken. "I'm standing in your mansion right now, Robert. I saved your daughter from a fire that was meant to kill her. I'm being followed by guards and questioned by dirty cops and whispered about by people who think I'm either a hero or a conspirator. Does any of that sound safe to you?" Robert flinched at her use of his first name. She'd never called him anything but Mr. Silva before. The intimacy of it felt like an accusation. "Why didn't you tell me?" Angela demanded, her voice dropping to something quieter, more devastating. "When you found out who I was, why didn't you tell me?" He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something crack in his carefully constructed armor. "Because I didn't know how to," he admitted. "I didn't know how to tell you that your brother died because of me, that he's dead because I brought violence into his life. I didn't know how to look at you, the woman who saved my daughter, who risks everything without expecting anything in return, and admit that I'm the reason your family is broken." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy and irreversible. Angela felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of him. "He believed in something," she said quietly. "You said he died protecting something he believed in. What was it? What was worth his life?" "Family," Robert said simply. "He believed in protecting family, just like you do." The parallel was intentional, and it cut deeper than any other word he could have chosen. Angela set the photo frame on his desk carefully, her wrapped hands trembling. "I need time," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to think." "Angela, please." She met his eyes, and whatever he saw there made him stop. "Just give me time." She walked out of his office, past his staring assistant, down the hallway where her guards immediately fell into step behind her. But for the first time since the fire, Angela didn't feel protected. She felt trapped in a web she'd walked into 3 years too late, connected to Robert Silva not just by circumstance or courage, but by blood and loss, and a brother whose sacrifice she'd never known about. The fragile trust that had been growing between them, built on fire and fear and Sophie's small hands clinging to her uniform, cracked like the glass in that scorched photo frame. And Angela didn't know if it could ever be repaired. Angela hadn't slept. 3 nights since she'd confronted Robert about Malcolm, and she'd spent each one staring at the ceiling of her small room, replaying the conversation. He died protecting something he believed in. The words circled her mind like vultures, picking at the edges of her grief until it bled fresh again. She'd been avoiding Robert, not difficult in a mansion this size. And he'd let her, which somehow made it worse. No explanations, no demands, just the weight of his absence and the constant presence of the guards who shadowed her everywhere. Tonight felt different. The air held a charge, like the moments before a thunderstorm. Angela sat on the edge of her bed, still dressed, unable to shake the feeling that something was coming. At 2:47 a.m., the mansion alarm shattered the silence. The sound was deafening, a piercing wail that sent immediate panic flooding through her veins. Angela was on her feet before conscious thought, yanking open her door just as the first gunshots cracked through the night. The hallway erupted into controlled chaos. Robert's men appeared from nowhere, weapons drawn, moving with military precision. Shouted commands echoed off marble walls. Through the window at the corridor's end, Angela saw flames, orange and hungry, climbing up from the garden level. No, not again. "All staff to secure positions," Marco's voice boomed from somewhere below. "This is not a drill." But Angela wasn't staff in that moment. She was the woman who'd held Sophie while a chandelier fell, who'd promised that little girl she'd keep her safe. She ran. Her guards shouted after her, but she was already sprinting toward the east wing, toward Sophie's room. Smoke was beginning to seep through the ventilation system, thin gray tendrils that burned her throat. The lights flickered once, twice, then the backup generators kicked in, bathing everything in harsh emergency lighting. More gunshots, closer now. Glass shattered somewhere behind her. A man screamed. Angela reached Sophie's hallway just as the smoke detectors began their own piercing shriek. The air here was thicker, harder to breathe. She covered her mouth with her sleeve and pushed forward. Sophie's door stood slightly ajar. Every instinct screamed danger. Angela slowed, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Through the gaps she could see Sophie's bed, empty, the window open, and standing beside it, Silhouetted by flames from the garden below was a man in black tactical gear. He turned as Angela burst through the door, and she saw Sophie, pressed against the far wall, frozen with terror, her small face streaked with tears. "Sophie, run!" Angela screamed. The intruder's weapon swung toward her. Angela didn't think. She launched herself sideways as the first shot cracked through the air, the bullet punching through the wall where she'd been standing. She felt the heat of it pass her shoulder. "Get down!" she shouted at Sophie, scrambling toward the girl. The second shot came as she moved. This one found her, a searing line of fire across her upper arm that made her gasp. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Angela reached Sophie and scooped her up in one fluid motion, the girl's arms immediately locking around her neck. The intruder was repositioning, raising his weapon again, and Angela knew with absolute certainty they wouldn't survive a third shot. She ran. The hallway had transformed into hell. Flames crawled up the wallpaper, feeding on expensive fabric and antique wood. The smoke was thick now, disorienting, burning her eyes and lungs. Sophie coughed against her shoulder, small body shaking with terror. "Close your eyes, baby," Angela gasped, trying to shield Sophie's face with her injured arm. Blood soaked through her sleeve, warm and sticky. "Don't look. Just hold on to me." Behind them, footsteps. The intruder was following. Angela made for the servants' staircase, the route she knew by heart, narrow and hidden. A section of ceiling collapsed ahead of them, showering embers. She veered left, muscles screaming, lungs burning. Sophie whimpered but didn't let go. Another gunshot. The bullet hit the wall beside Angela's head, exploding plaster. She stumbled but caught herself, kept moving. The flames seemed to chase them, spreading faster than should be possible. Accelerant, some distant part of her mind registered. "They're burning the mansion down around us." She reached the stairwell and practically threw herself down the steps, one arm wrapped around Sophie, the other hand trailing the wall for balance. The smoke was worse here, so thick she couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. At the landing, strong hands grabbed her. Angela screamed and lashed out, but then she recognized the voice cutting through her panic. "Angela, it's me!" Robert. He was covered in ash, his shirt torn, a cut bleeding down the side of his face. But his eyes were wild with something Angela had never seen there before: fear. "There's someone," Angela choked on smoke, coughing. "Sophie's room." Robert didn't wait for her to finish. He took Sophie from her arms, the girl crying now, reaching back for Angela, and physically moved Angela behind him, shielding them both with his body as more of his men thundered up the stairwell. "West corridor. Sophie's room," Robert barked. "One shooter, possibly more. Shoot to kill." His men moved past them like shadows. Robert's hand found Angela's shoulder, steadying her, and his eyes went to the blood soaking her sleeve. "You're hit." "It's just a graze," Angela managed, though the adrenaline was starting to wear off and the pain was becoming real, sharp, immediate. "You ran toward the danger." His voice was rough with smoke and something else. "Again." "She's just a little girl," Angela said, the words automatic now. Then quieter. "I promised her I'd keep her safe." Sophie reached for Angela then, and Robert let her, watched as his daughter buried her face against Angela's neck and clung there like she'd never let go. Around them, the mansion burned. Gunfire echoed from above. Chaos raged. But in that moment, the three of them stood together in the smoke-filled stairwell, and Robert Silva looked at Angela with an expression she couldn't name. 20 minutes later, the fire was contained. 2 intruders dead, 1 captured. The garden level was destroyed. Half of the east wing damaged beyond repair. Sophie was checked by paramedics, unharmed physically, traumatized emotionally. Angela's arm was cleaned and bandaged, the bullet having only grazed her. Robert stood in what remained of his office, Marco beside him, reviewing security footage on a laptop that had somehow survived the chaos. "Inside job," Marco said flatly. "Had to be. They knew Sophie's room, knew the security protocols, knew exactly when to hit us." "The traitor?" Robert asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Still in the organization. And now they know something else. Marco paused. They know killing the girl is one way to hurt you. But killing Angela Jackson might be easier. And watching you lose her. He didn't finish the thought. Robert's hands clenched into fists. On the screen, surveillance footage showed Angela running through fire, showed her throwing herself in front of his daughter, showed her taking a bullet and never stopping. Double her security, Robert ordered. She doesn't leave this house. She doesn't go anywhere without 4 men. Boss, with respect, that makes her more of a target. Everyone will know she's important. They already know, Robert said, his voice hard as stone. They've known since the first fire, since I stood in that ballroom and told everyone not to touch her. He closed the laptop, his reflection staring back at him from the dark screen. Somewhere above, Angela was with Sophie, probably reading to her, calming her, being exactly what his daughter needed in a way he'd never known how to be. Someone in his organization wanted him destroyed, wanted Sophie dead, and now, because of him, because of what Angela meant to his daughter, because of what she was beginning to mean to him, they'd put a target on her back. Robert had built his empire on control, on anticipating every threat and neutralizing it before it could strike. But he hadn't anticipated Angela Jackson, and now he didn't know how to keep her safe from the very world he'd brought her into. The mansion reconstruction moved slowly, hampered by investigators and insurance adjusters who photographed every inch of damage. The garden level remained a blackened shell. The east wing stood gutted, its elegant bones exposed like a corpse picked clean. Angela wasn't supposed to be there. But 2 weeks after the second fire, driven by restlessness and the need to do something besides sit in her room under armed guard, she'd slipped into the restricted zone while the construction crew was on lunch break. Her guards had protested, but she'd ignored them, earning a look of grudging respect from the younger one. The West Wing's storage room was where she'd found Malcolm's photo. Something pulled her back there now, though she couldn't have explained why. Maybe it was grief, maybe instinct, maybe just the maddening need for answers in a house built on secrets. The filing cabinet she'd opened before had been removed, but the wall behind it had partially collapsed in the second fire, revealing a gap in the plaster. Angela crouched down, peering into the darkness. Her phone's flashlight illuminated twisted metal studs and charred insulation. And something else, a glint of brass. She reached in carefully, her fingers closing around a small metal lockbox, the kind designed to survive fires. It was warm to the touch, the metal warped slightly by heat, but intact. Angela pulled it free and Utha sat back on her heels, heart racing. The lock had been damaged enough that it opened with minimal effort. Inside was a leather-bound ledger. Angela flipped it open and her breath caught. Page after page of entries, dates, initials, numbers that looked like account codes. But it was the names scrawled in the margins that made her blood run cold. Alderman Morrison, 50K, zoning approval date. Lyle, monthly retainer. Judge Chen, case dismissal, 75K, M. Costa, security breach, payment pending. Mateo Costa, Robert's right-hand man, mentioned in whispers as someone who'd been with the family for 20 years. Angela's hands trembled as she turned more pages. Politicians, police officers, judges, and woven throughout, initials she recognized from the mansion staff, from Robert's inner circle, from the men who'd stood guard at dinner parties. This wasn't just a record of corruption, it was a map of betrayal. She should have left it there, should have called Marco or the police, or anyone, but she found herself walking toward Robert's office, the ledger clutched against her chest, her guards trailing behind her with increasingly worried expressions. Robert looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. They'd barely spoken since their confrontation about Malcolm. He'd given her space, sent messages through Maria checking if she needed anything, but kept his distance. Now she stood in his doorway, covered in dust and ash, holding something that made his entire body go rigid. Where did you find that? His voice was carefully controlled, but Angela heard the edge beneath it. The West Wing, hidden behind the filing cabinet. She crossed to his desk and set the ledger down between them. You should see this. Robert stared at it like it might explode. Then, slowly, he opened it. Angela watched his face as he read, watched shock bleed into fury, then something colder and more dangerous. His jaw clenched. His hands gripped the edges of the book hard enough that his knuckles went white. Jesus Christ, he breathed. It's bad, isn't it? Bad? He looked up at her, and the raw vulnerability in his expression startled her. Angela, this is... He stopped, collected himself. You shouldn't have found this. But I did. You shouldn't have found this, he repeated, and this time she heard both fury and something that sounded absurdly like admiration. Do you understand what's in here? This is every dirty deal, every compromised official, every weak link in my organization. This is... He flipped through pages rapidly. Some of these entries go back years. Someone's been documenting everything, building a case or preparing to sell you out, Angela finished quietly. Robert's eyes snapped to hers. For a long moment, neither spoke. The initials, Angela said, pulling the ledger toward her and pointing to an entry. MC, that's Mateo Costa, isn't it? Your head of security? Was, Robert corrected, his voice hard. He's been under suspicion since the first fire. This confirms it. He turned more pages, his expression growing darker with each one. But it's not just him. There are at least 5 others here. People I've trusted for years, people I've... He stopped, jaw working. People you've treated like family, Angela said softly. The word hung between them, family, loaded with everything they hadn't said to each other in 2 weeks. Malcolm, Sophie. The impossible space Angela had carved out in a world that should have rejected her. Robert closed the ledger carefully, his hands steady now, despite the storm Angela could see building behind his eyes. You could have taken this to the police, to Lyle even. This would have been your ticket out of here. Protection, immunity, whatever you wanted. Angela met his gaze. I brought it to you. Why? It was a simple question, but the weight of it pressed down on everything. Why had she brought evidence of corruption and conspiracy to the man at the center of it? Why hadn't she run? Because, Angela said slowly, working through the truth even as she spoke it, whatever else is in that book, whatever else you've done, you loved my brother enough to protect my family from the truth. You loved Sophie enough to put yourself between her and danger. And you... She paused, something shifting in her chest. You've never lied to me, even when the truth cost you. Robert stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. You asked me once what I wanted, Angela continued. I want the truth. I want Sophie safe, and I want whoever killed Malcolm to answer for it. She touched the ledger. I think the answers are in here. Something cracked in Robert's carefully controlled expression. He stood abruptly, moving around the desk to stand directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion carved into his face, the weight of empire, pressing down on shoulders that suddenly looked less invincible than human. You need to leave, he said quietly. Go back to your apartment in the city. Disappear for a while. I'll give you money, protection, whatever you... No. Angela, no, she repeated firmly. I'm not running. You don't understand what you're involved in. What this, he gestured at the ledger, means someone in my organization has been planning this for years. They tried to kill me twice. They tried to kill Sophie. And now that they know you matter to... And he stopped, caught himself. Now that they know you're important to Sophie, they'll come for you. If you leave this house, you die. Then I won't leave. Angela, and I won't let that happen. She interrupted, her voice stronger now. I won't let them win. My brother died protecting your family. I'm not going to dishonor that by running when things get dangerous. Robert looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Frustration and admiration and something deeper that made her pulse quicken. You're impossible. I'm loyal, Angela corrected. There's a difference. In my world, loyalty gets people killed. In every world, loyalty is what keeps people alive. She held his gaze. You taught Malcolm that. He taught me. The mention of her brother seemed to undo something in him. Robert's hands came up, hovering near her shoulders like he wanted to touch her but didn't know if he was allowed. If you stay, you're under full protection, 24-hour guard. You go nowhere without my approval, and you, his voice dropped. You stay away from the investigation. No more exploring burned wings, no more finding evidence. You've done enough. Agreed, Angela said. Then, softer, thank you for not being angry that I found it. Angry? A ghost of something that might have been a smile crossed his face. I'm terrified, because finding that ledger means you're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most reckless, and I can't decide which is more dangerous for both of us. That night, Angela woke to a small sound at her door. Sophie stood there in her nightgown, clutching a stuffed rabbit, her face pale in the dim hallway light. Angela sat up immediately, concern flooding through her. Sophie? Sweetheart, what's wrong? The little girl padded into the room and climbed onto Angela's bed without asking permission, curling against her side with practiced ease. I had a bad dream about the fire. Angela wrapped her arms around her, pressing a kiss to blonde hair that smelled of lavender shampoo. You're safe now, I promise. I know. Sophie was quiet for a moment, then, Daddy doesn't sleep anymore. Angela stilled. What do you mean? Heard him walking in the hallway, late at night. He checks my room a lot. Sophie tilted her head up, her serious eyes, so much like Robert's, studying Angela's face. But when you're here, he sleeps, I can tell. How can you tell? Because he smiles more, and he's not scared all the time. Sophie nestled closer. You make him feel safe, like you make me feel safe. The words settled over Angela like a revelation. She thought about Robert's expression when he'd found her in the stairwell during the second fire. The way he'd positioned himself between her and danger. The raw vulnerability when she'd brought him the ledger. If you leave this house, you die, and I won't let that happen. Not I can't let that happen, not that would be unfortunate. I won't. For the first time, Angela understood the full weight of what had changed between them. She wasn't just the maid who'd saved his daughter. She'd become something else entirely, something that mattered to both Silva family members in ways that defied the rules of the world they lived in. Stay here tonight? Sophie whispered. Angela held her closer. I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. As Sophie's breathing evened out into sleep, Angela stared at the ceiling and realized the terrible, wonderful truth. Her presence had changed them, all three of them, and there was no going back to who they'd been before the fire. The ledger unraveled everything. Within 48 hours, Robert's investigators had cross-referenced entries, tracked financial patterns, and identified the source. The conspiracy wasn't just extensive, it was personal. Mateo Costa, Robert's head of security for 15 years, the man who'd stood beside him at his wife's funeral, who'd taught Sophie to ride a bike, had been selling him out to the Caruso family for nearly 3 years. Both fires. The explosives in Robert's car that killed Malcolm. The coded communications. The insider information that had nearly destroyed the Silva empire. All Mateo. They found him trying to flee through the service entrance at 3 a.m., a bag of cash and fake documents in his possession. Robert's men dragged him to the wine cellar, the old stone room beneath the mansion that had survived both fires, the place where the family handled problems that couldn't see daylight. Angela knew something was happening by the tension that crackled through the house like electricity. Guards moved with heightened alertness, doors locked that were usually open, and Robert had transformed into someone she barely recognized. Cold, distant, dangerous. She was putting Sophie to bed when she heard the shouting from below. Stay here, sweetheart, Angela said, tucking the covers around the girl. I'll be right back. Sophie's fingers caught her sleeve. Is Daddy angry? The fear in that small voice broke Angela's heart. He's just dealing with grown-up things. Nothing for you to worry about. But Angela was worried, terribly worried. She moved through the mansion on instinct, following the raised voices to a door she'd never noticed before, hidden behind a portrait in the library. Her guards tried to stop her, but she'd learned that determination could overcome authority, especially when that authority was uncertain. The stairs descended into cool darkness. Stone walls, the smell of earth and wine, and something metallic that made her stomach turn. At the bottom, a thick wooden door stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could see them. Mateo Costa, bloodied and bound to a chair. Robert standing before him, suit jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up. Marco and two other men flanking them. The scene looked medieval, ancient justice being dispensed in a modern hell. Tell me everything, Robert was saying, his voice terrifyingly calm. The Carusos. How long? How much? Matteo laughed, the sound wet and broken. 3 years, Roberto. 3 years I fed them everything. Your roots, your contacts, your weaknesses. He spat blood onto the floor. You never even noticed. The fires? Mine, both of them. Would have worked too, if not for your little pet Maid. Matteo's eyes, swollen and defiant, found Angela in the doorway. There she is, the hero. Tell me, Angela, do you know what your brother was? Angela's blood turned to ice. Don't, Robert warned, his voice dropping to something lethal. But Matteo continued, teeth red with blood and malice. Malcolm wasn't checking your car for routine maintenance that day, boss. He was installing a tracker for me. For the Carusos. The bomb was meant for you, but Malcolm got sloppy, triggered it early. He wasn't a hero. He was a traitor, just like me. The world tilted. Angela heard the words, understood them, but couldn't make them fit together. Malcolm, her brother. The boy who'd protected her from their father's rages, who'd sent money home even when he had nothing, who'd promised to build them a better life. You're lying, she whispered. Matteo smiled through broken teeth. The Carusos have records, payments, communications. Your brother sold out Silva for 18 months before that bomb turned him into hamburger meat. He wasn't collateral damage, sweetheart. He was competition I had to eliminate. Robert moved so fast Angela barely saw it. His fist connected with Matteo's jaw with a crack that echoed off stone walls. The chair tipped backward, and Matteo hit the floor hard. Take him to the lake house, Robert ordered, his voice empty of all emotion. Make it clean. Make it disappear. I want him gone by sunrise. The execution order was absolute, final. No, Angela heard herself say. Everyone turned to look at her. She stepped fully into the room, her legs trembling, but her voice steady. You can't kill him. Robert's expression was stone. Angela, go back upstairs. Not until you listen to me. She moved closer, forcing herself between Robert and the man who'd orchestrated her brother's death. If you kill him, you're no better than them. No better than the Carusos, or the people who planted those bombs, or... You don't understand what you're asking, Robert interrupted, his voice hard as granite. This is my world, Angela. This is how it works. Then change how it works. Her voice cracked with emotion. You told me Malcolm died protecting something he believed in. Was that a lie too? Or does family still mean something in this world? He betrayed me, Robert said, gesturing at Matteo. Killed your brother, tried to kill Sophie, twice. You want me to show him mercy? I want you to be better than what this world expects you to be. Tears burned Angela's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Malcolm might have made mistakes, might have been caught up in something he didn't understand. But killing Matteo won't bring him back. It won't protect Sophie. It'll just make you into the monster everyone already thinks you are. And if I let him live, Robert stepped closer, his voice dropping to something raw. If I show mercy, what happens when the next traitor thinks they'll get away with it too? What happens when someone else tries to hurt Sophie because they think I'm weak? You're not weak for choosing life over death, Angela said quietly. You're strong, stronger than any man who rules through fear. Robert stared at her, and she saw the war raging behind his eyes. 20 years of survival instincts, of hard-won power, built on swift and brutal justice, colliding with the impossible thing she was asking him to do. You don't understand what mercy costs in my world, he finally said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Then teach me, Angela challenged. Help me understand why my brother's death has to lead to more death, why Sophie has to grow up thinking violence is the only answer. The mention of his daughter made something crack in Robert's armor. He looked at Matteo, broken, defeated, no longer a threat, and then back at Angela, standing between them like a shield made of conviction. Get him out of my sight, Robert ordered, his voice rough. Federal custody, anonymous tip. Let the system deal with him. Marco's eyebrows shot up. Boss, now! His men moved to obey, hauling Matteo up and dragging him toward a different exit. Matteo laughed weakly as they took him away. "You're going soft, Roberto. She's already killed you. You just don't know it yet." The door slammed. Silence filled the wine cellar like water. Robert and Angela stood alone in the stone room, the weight of what had just happened settling over them like ash. "You should hate me," Robert said quietly, not looking at her. "Your brother died because of my world, because of the choices I made, and the enemies I created. I do hate parts of your world," Angela admitted, "but I don't hate you. And Malcolm made his own choices, good or bad. I can't change that now." Robert's jaw clenched. Her words, your words, about Sophie, about being better. He finally looked at her. "They'll haunt me, you know that?" "Good," Angela said softly. "Someone should haunt you. Someone should remind you that you're more than what this world demands." Hours later, near dawn, Robert found himself walking the mansion's quiet hallways. Sleep was impossible. The ghost of Matteo's laughter echoed in his mind, tangled with Angela's voice. "You're no better than them." He paused outside the music room, drawn by a sound he couldn't immediately place. Humming, soft and melodic. Through the doorway, he saw them. Angela in the window seat. Sophie curled in her lap, both bathed in early morning light. Angela was singing something, a lullaby maybe, while Sophie's breathing evened into sleep. The scene was so ordinary, so achingly domestic, that Robert felt something shift in his chest. Peace. He'd built an empire, commanded loyalty through fear, survived assassination attempts and rival families and 20 years of bloodshed. But standing there, watching a former maid hold his daughter like she was precious beyond measure, Robert Silva felt something he'd never allowed himself to feel. Safe. Angela looked up and saw him. Their eyes met across the room, and no words were necessary. She'd seen him at his worst tonight, had witnessed the violence he was capable of, and hadn't run, hadn't condemned, had simply asked him to be better. And somehow, impossibly, he wanted to try, for her, for Sophie, for the family they were accidentally becoming in the ruins of his burning empire. Angela woke to wrongness. She couldn't name it at first, just an instinct honed by years of survival, the same warning signal that had saved her life twice already in this mansion. The pre-dawn light filtered gray through her window. The house was silent. Too silent. She was moving before conscious thought, pulling on clothes and crossing the hallway to Sophie's room. The door stood open. The bed was empty, covers thrown back in haste. "Sophie?" Angela's voice cracked the silence. She checked the bathroom, the closet under the bed. Nothing. Her heart began to hammer. She ran into the hallway, nearly colliding with one of the night guards. "Where's Sophie?" she demanded. The guard's face went pale. "She was in her room. I checked 20 minutes ago. She's gone!" The mansion erupted. Alarms, shouting. Robert appeared in seconds, still pulling on a shirt, his face transforming from concern to cold fury as he understood. "Lock down the estate," he barked at Marco. "Nobody in or out. Check every room, every—" His phone rang. Unknown number. Robert answered on speaker. "Who is this?" A voice, distorted by a modulator, filled the silence. "Good morning, Mr. Silva. We have your daughter." Angela felt the floor drop away. "If you harm her—" Robert's voice was lethal. "The ledger," the voice interrupted. "The one your maid found. You have 3 hours to deliver it to the old Riverside warehouse on Sullivan Street. Come alone. No police, no games. Or we mail you pieces of your daughter." The line went dead. Robert stood frozen, the phone still in his hand, and Angela saw something she'd never seen before. Absolute, paralyzing fear. "We can trace the call," Marco started. "Mobilize everyone, hit every Caruso property." "No." Robert's voice was hollow. "They'll kill her. The second they know we're coming, they'll—" He stopped, unable to finish. Angela's mind was racing. 3 hours. A warehouse. The ledger for Sophie's life. It was a trap, obviously. They'd take the ledger, kill Sophie anyway, probably kill Robert, too. The Carusos wouldn't leave loose ends, unless someone gave them a different target. "I'll take it," Angela heard herself say. Everyone turned to stare at her. "Absolutely not," Robert said immediately. They want the ledger. I'll deliver it, me alone, like they asked. Angela, think about it, she pressed, urgency sharpening her voice. They're expecting you. They'll have people positioned to kill you the second you arrive. But me? I'm nobody, just the maid. Maybe they'll hesitate. Maybe that gives Sophie a chance. Or they kill you both, Robert said flatly. No, I won't allow it. Angela stepped closer to him, forcing him to meet her eyes. She's terrified right now, alone, with people who want to hurt her. Every second we waste, planning the perfect tactical response is another second she thinks nobody's coming. Her voice dropped. I promised her I'd keep her safe. I'm not breaking that promise. You'll die, Robert said, and the rawness in his voice made her chest ache. Maybe, but Sophie might live. Isn't that all that matters? The warehouse stood like a tombstone against the lightning sky. Angela approached on foot, the ledger tucked under her arm, her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. No weapons, no wire. Just her and the desperate hope that she could buy enough time for whatever Robert was planning. Because she knew him well enough now to know he wouldn't stay away. He'd come. The question was whether she could keep Sophie alive long enough. The warehouse door hung open, darkness beyond. Angela stepped inside, her eyes adjusted slowly. Empty pallets, rusted machinery. And in the center, illuminated by a single hanging bulb, Sophie sat bound to a chair, duct tape across her mouth, tears streaming down her small face. Sophie! Angela started forward. That's far enough. Men emerged from the shadows. 5, maybe 6, all armed. The one who'd spoken wore an expensive suit that looked wrong in this place. Caruso family, had to be. The ledger, he demanded. Gesturing with his gun, Angela held it up. Let her go first. The man laughed. That's not how this works, sweetheart. Ledger first. Then maybe we don't kill you both. The ledger is the only leverage I have, Angela said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. You're not getting it until Sophie is untied and standing beside me. You're in no position to negotiate. Then shoot me. Angela met his eyes. But you won't get the book, and Mr. Silva will burn your entire family to ash for what you've done here. Is that really worth it? A tense silence. Then, grudgingly, untie the kid. One of the men moved toward Sophie. Angela watched carefully as he cut the ropes, pulled the tape from her mouth. Sophie sobbed and ran to Angela, who caught her and immediately positioned herself between the girl and the gunman. The ledger, the lead Caruso repeated. Angela set it on the ground and kicked it toward him. There, we're done. Let us walk out. You really think it's that simple? He picked up the book, flipped through it, then smiled, a cold, reptilian expression. This book proves the Silvas are finished, and you, sweetheart, are witnesses who can identify us. Nobody walks out. He raised his gun. Angela dropped to her knees, covering Sophie with her body just as the warehouse exploded into violence. Not from the Carusos. From outside. The doors burst open, and Robert's men poured in like a flood. Tactical gear, automatic weapons, moving with military precision. The Carusos returned fire, and suddenly bullets were screaming through the air, ricocheting off metal, punching through wood. Angela curled tighter around Sophie, making herself as small as possible while shielding every inch of the girl. She felt something hot tear across her side, a bullet or debris, she couldn't tell. Pain blossomed sharp and immediate, but she didn't move. Couldn't move. Sophie was crying beneath her, and Angela just held on, whispering the same words she'd said in the fire. I've got you, I've got you, I've got you. The gunfire was deafening. Someone screamed, glass shattered, and then, cutting through the chaos like a blade, don't touch her! Robert's voice. Absolute. Commanding. Angela felt hands on her shoulders, gentle but urgent, and looked up to see Robert kneeling beside her, his face streaked with blood that might not have been his own. His eyes swept over her, cataloging injuries, and when he saw the blood spreading across her shirt, something feral crossed his expression. Sophie first, Angela gasped. Take Sophie, but Robert was already lifting them both. Angela, still wrapped around his daughter, refusing to let go. He carried them like that. The woman and child tangled together, toward the exit where his men had formed a protective corridor. Behind them, the remaining Carusos were being neutralized, efficiently, brutally. Robert didn't look back. Outside, paramedics rushed forward. Robert finally set them down, but when the EMTs tried to separate Angela from Sophie to treat her wound, the little girl screamed and clung tighter. "It's okay, baby," Angela soothed, even as her vision blurred at the edges. "Let them help. I'm okay." "You're bleeding," Sophie sobbed. "You're bleeding because of me, because I love you," Angela interrupted, the truth spilling out before she could stop it. "And I'd bleed 1,000 times to keep you safe." The words hung in the air, honest and raw. Robert stood frozen, watching them. His shirt was torn, his knuckles split, his face carved with an emotion Angela had never seen there before. When a federal agent approached to take his statement, Robert turned with such cold fury that the man actually stepped back. "Don't touch her," Robert repeated, quieter now, but no less absolute. He moved to where Angela sat, Sophie still in her arms, blood soaking through the temporary bandage the paramedics had applied. "Hospital," he ordered. "Private room, 24-hour guard. And someone get me the head of the Caruso family on the phone, now." "Boss, they're all dead," Marco said quietly. "The ones in the warehouse. They were it. Their leadership. Without them, then their organization is finished," Robert said flatly. "Make sure of it." He looked at Angela, at the woman who'd thrown herself in front of bullets for his daughter, and something in his carefully constructed walls finally completely crumbled. "You should have waited for me," he said, his voice rough with emotion he could no longer hide. "I couldn't," Angela whispered. "She needed someone. She needed me." "We both do," Robert admitted, so quietly Angela almost didn't hear it. Sophie had fallen asleep against Angela's shoulder, exhausted by terror and relief. The ambulance waited. The mansion, damaged but standing, loomed in the distance. And Robert Silva, kneeling in the dirt beside the maid who'd become his salvation, finally understood what his world had cost him until she'd arrived to show him what it could give back. 6 weeks after the warehouse, the Silva mansion had transformed. The reconstruction was complete, not just repaired but reborn. The West Wing stood whole again, its windows gleaming in afternoon sun. The ballroom had been restored to its original grandeur, though the new chandelier hung slightly lower as if the house itself had learned humility. The garden level bloomed with late autumn flowers, covering the scorched earth with life. Angela stood in her small room, the same room she'd occupied for nearly a year now, and carefully folded clothes into a suitcase. Her hands had healed, leaving only faint scars across her palms. The bullet graze on her side was a pink line she'd carry forever. Small prices for the lives she'd saved. The mansion was safe now. Robert had systematically dismantled the Caruso operation, absorbed their territories, and rebuilt his organization with people he'd personally vetted. The ledger had been destroyed, but not before Robert had used it to clean house, removing every compromised official, every weak link, every person who'd betrayed his trust. What remained was smaller but stronger, and somehow, despite everything, legitimate businesses were beginning to overtake the criminal enterprises. Robert was changing. Slowly, but changing. Sophie was healing too. The nightmares came less frequently now. She laughed again, real laughter, that filled the mansion's halls with a lightness that had never existed before. She'd started school, made friends, begun remembering how to be a child instead of a target, which meant Angela's work here was done. She'd stayed too long already, crossed too many lines, become too important to people who deserved better than a maid from Georgia with scars on her hands and ghosts in her past. It was time to go. "You're really leaving?" Maria stood in the doorway, her weathered face creased with concern. "After everything?" "Because of everything," Angela said softly. "They need to be a family, Maria. A real family. Not one held together by trauma and debt." "And you don't think you're part of that family?" Angela smiled sadly. "I'm the person who kept them alive. That's different from belonging." But her hands trembled as she zipped the suitcase. She'd planned to leave quietly, early morning, before Sophie woke, a note for Robert explaining that some debts couldn't be repaid and some distances were necessary for healing. She'd even arranged for a car service, paid for with money she'd carefully saved. She made it as far as the gates, Robert stood there, leaning against his car, arms crossed, looking like he'd been waiting for hours. Maybe he had been. Going somewhere? His voice was casual, but Angela heard the tension beneath it. I was going to leave a note, she said, setting down her suitcase. I know, I found it. He pulled the envelope from his jacket pocket. Didn't read it. Figured if you had something to say, you should say it to my face. Angela looked at him, really looked. 6 weeks ago, he'd been a man barely holding himself together, ruling through fear and fury. Now he stood differently, looser, more present. The lines around his eyes had softened, and when he looked at her, there was no calculation, just honesty. You don't need me anymore, Angela said quietly. Sophie's safe. The traitors are gone. Your empire is secure. I'm just essential, Robert interrupted. You're essential, Angela. To Sophie, to this family, to... He stopped, jaw working. To me. The confession hung between them like something fragile. Robert. No, let me say this. I've been practicing for 2 days. He stepped closer, and Angela saw vulnerability in his expression that would have been unthinkable months ago. You walked into my world and made me human again. You could have run a dozen times, should have run, but you stayed, even when it cost you everything. I stayed for Sophie, Angela said, her throat tight. You stayed for both of us, Robert corrected gently. Don't pretend you didn't. I've watched you, Angela. The way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention, the way you hold your breath when I walk into a room, the way you... He stopped, swallowed hard. The way you've given us a future we didn't deserve. Tears burned behind Angela's eyes. Your world killed my brother. I know. It almost killed Sophie, almost killed me. I know. And you're asking me to stay anyway? Her voice cracked. To what? Be a maid forever? Watch you from a distance while I pretend this is enough? No, Robert said, and the absolute certainty in his voice made her look up. I'm asking you to be family. Real family, not staff, not obligation, just... He reached for her hand, his touch gentle on her scarred palm. Just ours. Angela stared at their joined hands, his knuckles scarred from violence, hers marked by fire, and felt something break open in her chest. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I don't know how to love someone whose world is built on things I can't accept. Then help me change it, Robert said. You've already started. The legitimate businesses, the reduced violence. The way I think before I act now, because I hear your voice asking me to be better. He squeezed her hand. I'm not perfect, Angela. My world is complicated and I'll make mistakes. But with you, his voice roughened. With you, I want to try. For Sophie. For us. What if I'm not strong enough? Angela asked. What if the next fire? Then we'll walk through it together, Robert interrupted, like we have every other time. Angela looked past him toward the mansion. Through the ballroom windows, she could see Sophie dancing by herself, twirling in circles, her blonde hair catching light from the chandelier above. The same ballroom where Angela had first thrown herself into flames, where she'd covered a terrified child with her own body, where she'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was choosing love despite it. One condition, Angela finally said. Anything. No more secrets. If I stay, we face everything honestly, all of it. The good, the bad, the complicated. Robert nodded solemnly. Our secrets? And Sophie comes first. Always. Always, he agreed. Then softer. Is that a yes? Angela looked at him, at this impossible man who'd learned to choose life over death, mercy over vengeance, love over power, and felt her carefully constructed walls crumble. It's a yes, she whispered. Robert pulled her into his arms, and Angela let herself melt into the embrace, into the impossible safety of it. Behind them, the gates stood open. She could still leave, could still walk away, but she was done running. That evening, the three of them stood together in the ballroom, the same space where their story had begun in fire and fear. Sophie held both their hands, swinging between them, her laughter echoing off the restored walls. The new chandelier sparkled overhead, its crystals catching light and throwing rainbow prisms across the polished floor. It's beautiful, Sophie breathed, like magic. Like hope, Angela corrected, meeting Robert's eyes over his daughter's head. He smiled. A real smile, the kind she'd rarely seen, and squeezed her hand. The fire that had once threatened to destroy them had instead burned away everything false, everything weak, everything that couldn't survive the heat. What remained was stronger, truer, built not on power or fear, but on the impossible courage of a woman who'd thrown herself into flames. And in the light of that rebuilt ballroom, with Sophie's laughter surrounding them and Robert's hand warm in hers, Angela Jackson finally understood what home felt like. Not a place, but people worth burning for, and worth building everything new with, from the ashes up.